You need
They
to listen to
ignored
me
a black
right now.
CEO in first class.
No, you
minutes
aren't.
later,
Do you understand what I'm
the
telling
plane
you?
was
You need
forced
to move.
turn back.
Listen to that.
Hello,
You need to move now.
everyone. Before we begin today's video,
I'm staying right
I
here.
need your help.
No.
We've
sorry, sir,
noticed
but you have
that
to
the
come with us.
channel is
No, please, I
losing
didn't do anything.
traction.
We have the footage. Don't make this
Subscribing
harder.
is one of the best
Step
ways
into
you
the
can
aisle, please.
help us.
No, I have to take this. I
It's
can't
quick,
Sir, you
free,
need to hang
and
up the phone
allows
now.
us
We are
to
taking off.
continue
Just give me a
bringing you
second.
great content.
Please, sir, just comply. Something is
Your
happening up ahead.
support means everything.
What do we do?
Come on, we need to
Let's
move.
keep this
now.
channel growing collectively.
Thank you.
Where are you
We're here for
watching
you.
from? Drop your city or
Should we get
country in the
something?
comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. The first-class cabin was quiet in that curated, expensive way. Soft leather. Low voices. The hum of engines steady controlled like nothing here was ever meant to go wrong. Then, a finger cut through the air. Sir. The black man in seat 2 looked up. The flight attendant stood over him, body angled forward, jaw tight, one finger pointed inches from his face. Not a request. Not a question. A verdict. You need to move. This seat is not for you. A few heads turned. Most didn't. That was how it always started. He didn't flinch. Didn't raise his voice. He simply met her eyes calm, unreadable, like a man who had already heard this line before the words fully left her mouth. She mistook that calm for confusion. This is first class, she continued louder now. Your seat is in economy. The word you're landed heavy. Possessive. Dismissive. He glanced down at the polished armrest, the stitched leather, the champagne flute untouched beside him. Then back up at her, still silent. Around them, the cabin stiffened. A woman across the aisle stared straight ahead, suddenly fascinated by the safety card. A man 2 rows back leaned slightly into the aisle, eyes narrowing curiosity fighting caution. The attendant crossed her arms, authority settling into her posture. We don't have time for this, she said. People try this all the time. That was the line. Not you're mistaken. Not let me check. People like you. He felt it then, not surprise, not even anger. Recognition. The familiar weight of being assessed, reduced, and dismissed in under 5 seconds.
Slowly, deliberately, he reached into his jacket and removed his boarding pass.
Here.
She glanced at it.
Not even a full second. Then handed it back as if it were irrelevant. This doesn't prove anything, she said flatly. A breath passed. Maybe 2. No one intervened. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now back to Marcus. Marcus Carter looked at the boarding pass in his hand, then folded it once. Neatly, carefully, like a man buying time not for fear but for precision. He could feel the cabin watching him now, even if they pretended not to, waiting to see what kind of black man he would be. The loud one, the angry one, the one they could justify removing. Instead, he sat back into the seat. I'm not moving, he said quietly. The attendant blinked. Once. I beg your pardon, you heard me. Her lips tightened. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice, not out of respect, but control. Sir, if you don't comply, I'll have security remove you from the aircraft. There it was the escalation, the threat wrapped in policy. Marcus nodded once, almost to himself. Do what you need to do, he replied. The engines continued their steady hum, but the cabin no longer felt calm. It felt like something had been set in motion, something that could not be undone. Marcus Carter sat still, hands resting loosely on the armrests, posture relaxed in a way that came from years of discipline, not comfort. The kind learned in boardrooms where silence spoke louder than dominance, and in rooms where you learned early that reacting too fast gave other people control. From the outside, he looked like any other well-dressed passenger who'd boarded late. Brown blazer, clean white shirt, no watch screaming status, no logos begging for recognition, just restraint. That, too, was intentional. The flight attendant took a step back, clearly expecting movement, an apology, maybe embarrassment. Something she could file away as confirmation that she was right. Marcus gave her nothing. Inside, his mind was steady. He wasn't confused. He wasn't shocked. He wasn't even angry yet. What he felt was older than anger. He recognized the pattern the way a seasoned pilot recognizes turbulence before the seatbelt sign comes on. Different airline. Same assumptions. He'd learned a long time ago that looking powerful and being powerful were two very different things. Looking powerful invited challenges. Being powerful let you wait. He glanced around the cabin, now letting his eyes move not in defiance but awareness. 2 rows ahead, a white couple sat stiffly, pretending to be absorbed in their phones. Their shoulders were tense. They'd noticed. Everyone had. But noticing and intervening were very different commitments. Across the aisle, the woman in the navy suit finally looked at him. Their eyes met for half a second. Something passed between them, recognition maybe, or doubt. Then she looked away. Marcus almost smiled. He remembered his first-class flight years ago. Not this airline. Another life. He'd been younger, sharper at the edges, still carrying the need to prove himself into every room. He'd dressed louder then, thought success needed witnesses. That flight, the attendant had smiled too much, asked too many questions, touched his boarding pass like it might dissolve in her hand. Same seat. Same disbelief. Back then, he'd spoken up faster. It hadn't helped. The attendant in front of him cleared her throat, now impatience creeping into her voice. "Sir, you're holding up the cabin," she said. "We have a full flight." Marcus looked up at her again, expression neutral. "Calm enough to be unsettling." "I boarded when my group was called," he replied. "Just like everyone else." That wasn't defiance. It was a statement of fact. Her jaw tightened. She wasn't used to facts complicating her authority. "Let me be clear," she said. "This seat is reserved." Marcus nodded slowly as if considering her words for the first time. "So am I," he said. The air between them shifted. Not loud. Not dramatic. But perceptible, like pressure changing before a storm. Behind her, another flight attendant hovered, eyes flicking between Marcus and the aisle. He hadn't spoken yet. Hadn't taken sides. But his silence wasn't neutral.
Silence never was.
Marcus noticed that too. He could feel the question forming in the cabin, now unspoken but alive. Who is this man? They didn't know his name. Didn't know the companies he'd built. Didn't know the contracts he was flying to finalize. All they saw was a black man refusing to shrink on command. And for some people, that alone felt like a violation. Marcus leaned back into the seat, exhaled once, slow and measured. He wasn't bracing himself. He was giving them time. Time to choose what kind of moment this would become. Because whether they realized it or not, the cabin had already crossed the point of no return. The attendant straightened shoulders, squaring as if she'd made a decision. Whatever patience she'd pretended to have was gone now. "I'm calling the lead," she said, already turning away. "Not to help. To escalate." Marcus watched her walk down the aisle, heels, precise practice. This wasn't improvisation. This was routine. A script she'd run before, maybe not with him, but with someone who looked enough like him to trigger the same response. The cabin shifted with her movement. A ripple of attention followed. Conversations died mid-sentence.
Screens dimmed.
People pretended to read while listening harder than they ever had. Marcus remained seated. A moment later, she returned, this time with the purser. Older. Calmer. The kind of calm that came from seniority, not empathy. "What seems to be the issue?" the purser asked, though his eyes were already on Marcus. The attendant answered for him. "This passenger is refusing to move from a seat that isn't his." Marcus tilted his head slightly. "Just enough." "That's not accurate," he said. "This is my assigned seat." The purser held out a hand. May I see your boarding pass, Sir Marcus passed it over?
Slowly.
Deliberately. Not as proof, but as record. The purser studied it longer this time. Longer than the first attendant had. His brow furrowed just slightly. Something wasn't aligning the way he'd expected. The attendant leaned in, whispered something Marcus couldn't hear. The purser handed the boarding pass back. Sir, he said, carefully, there appears to be a discrepancy. A word designed to sound neutral. Technical. Safe. What kind of discrepancy? Marcus asked. The purser hesitated. That hesitation mattered. It's unclear, he said. Sometimes there are last-minute changes. Changes I wasn't informed about, Marcus replied. The purser didn't answer that. Instead, he glanced toward the front of the cabin where the cockpit door stood closed and distant. A silent authority above them all. The attendant crossed her arms again, emboldened now. We need you to cooperate, she said. You're delaying departure. There it was again. Responsibility shifted. Blame reassigned. Marcus felt the familiar pressure, the subtle attempt to make him the problem everyone wanted resolved. He scanned the cabin once more. A man in row 4 shook his head almost imperceptibly. A woman near the window had begun recording phone low screen, tilted just enough to capture faces. The younger flight attendant, the one who'd been hovering earlier, stood a few steps back, jaw tight, eyes darting between the boarding pass scanner and Marcus. He noticed her fingers twitch. The purser cleared his throat. Sir, if you don't move voluntarily, we may have to involve ground security. The word security landed heavier than the rest. Marcus looked at him steadily. No fear. No challenge. Just clarity. For sitting in the seat I paid for, he asked. The purser's eyes flickered. He hadn't expected the question framed that way. The attendant answered instead. For non-compliance. Marcus nodded once. He leaned back slightly, resting his shoulders against the seat. Not retreating. Anchoring. Then let's be very clear, he said evenly. I am not refusing instructions. I'm disputing an error. Silence stretched. The purser exhaled through his nose, already calculating. Delays meant reports. Reports meant scrutiny. Scrutiny meant accountability. Behind him, the younger attendant spoke quiet but audible. I saw it scan green, she said. Every head turned. The senior attendant snapped around. Excuse me, I was at the gate, the younger one continued. His pass scanned green. First class. The cabin seemed to inhale all at once. The purser looked between them now, authority cracking just enough to show the fault line underneath. Marcus said nothing. He didn't need to. Because the situation had shifted. What began as dismissal had become contradiction.
And contradictions had consequences.
The words lingered in the air. I saw it scan green. No one moved. Not at first. The younger attendant stood frozen in place as if she hadn't meant to speak out loud, only realized too late that silence had already chosen a side for her. Her hands were clenched at her sides, knuckles pale, eyes fixed on the purser. Not defiant. Honest. The senior attendant recovered first. That's not what the system shows now, she snapped. And you're not authorized to interpret boarding data. The reprimand was sharp practiced. A warning disguised as procedure. The younger attendant swallowed. She didn't argue. Didn't need to. She'd already done the one thing that couldn't be undone. She'd contradicted the story. Marcus felt the shift ripple through the cabin like a low vibration. Not loud. Not visible. But undeniable. People were watching now, really watching. The man in row 4 leaned farther into the aisle, arms crossed, no longer pretending disinterest. The woman by the window adjusted her phone angle slightly higher. Another passenger glanced back, then forward again, weighing whether this moment would matter enough to remember. This was the space where truth either collapsed or gathered allies. The purser rubbed his jaw, buying time. Authority was supposed to be clean, linear. This was neither. "Let's all take a breath," he said finally. There may have been a miscommunication at the gate. A miscommunication. The safest phrase in any institution. Marcus looked at him calmly. "Between whom?" he asked. The purser didn't answer, because the answer was obvious and uncomfortable. The senior attendant stepped closer again, voice lowered but tense.
Sir, I need you to understand how serious this is, she said.
"If you continue to disrupt, I'm not disrupting anything," Marcus replied evenly. "I'm sitting." That landed harder than shouting ever could. A murmur moved through the cabin. Not agreement yet, but recognition. The kind that came when people realized the narrative they'd been offered didn't quite fit what they were seeing. The younger attendant spoke again, softer this time. "I double-checked," she said. "At the scanner." The senior attendant turned sharply. "That's enough." The purser raised a hand, stopping her.
Just for a moment.
Marcus watched that exchange closely. Power revealing, it seems. The purser looked at the younger attendant, then at Marcus, then at the closed cockpit door. He was standing at a crossroads he hadn't expected when his shift began. Around them, the cabin had stopped pretending. Faces were turned openly now. Judgment suspended, but curiosity fully engaged. A woman whispered to her partner. A man shook his head once, slow and deliberate. "Someone farther back," muttered. "This doesn't feel right." Marcus felt none of it rush him. He stayed exactly where he was grounded, present, not as a provocation, but as a mirror. He knew this moment well, the moment where institutions hoped discomfort would do their work for them, where the pressure of being watched was supposed to make him fold, apologize, comply so everyone else could get where they were going without having to think about it. But Marcus had spent decades learning when to wait. The purser cleared his throat again. "Sir," he said, choosing his words carefully. "Now we're going to pause boarding until we sort this out." The senior attendant's eyes flashed. That wasn't the outcome she'd wanted. Marcus nodded once. Not in gratitude, in acknowledgement. The plane hadn't moved. But something else had, because the cabin was no longer watching him. They were watching the people trying to move him. And that was when the balance truly began to change. The pause should have cooled things down. It didn't. The senior attendant exhaled sharply, frustration breaking through her composure. She glanced at the purser, then back at Marcus, eyes hardening as if she'd decided patience was no longer useful. "This situation is escalating because you won't cooperate," she said. Her voice carried now just enough for nearby rows to hear. Marcus looked up at her, slow and steady. "I've cooperated," he replied. "I showed my boarding pass. I answered your questions. I stayed seated." "That's not cooperation," she shot back. "That's obstruction." The word hit the cabin like a spark. Obstruction. Non-compliance. Security. Each one carefully chosen. Each one designed to justify what came next. The purser shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "Let's keep this professional," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. The attendant didn't look at him. "Sir," she said to Marcus, "stand up." The command was sharp. Final. A hush fell over the cabin, not the polite quiet from before, but a brittle one. The kind that comes right before something breaks. Marcus felt it then. The moment tightening, the invisible line being dragged across the floor. He didn't stand. Instead, he looked at her finger again, the same one that had pointed at him earlier. Now it hovered near his shoulder, too close. Familiar in the worst way. "I'm asking you one last time," she said. "Do not make this harder than it needs to be." Harder for whom Marcus's voice remained level. "You're asking me to leave my seat without cause." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Your attitude is the cause." That was it. Not the seat. Not the ticket. Not the system. Him. A ripple of sound moved through the cabin. Someone inhaled sharply. Another person whispered, "Wow." The younger attendant took a step forward instinctively. "That's not stay out of this," the senior attendant snapped, not even turning around. The purser raised his hand again, but too late. Control had already slipped. Marcus felt a memory surface, then uninvited. Another airport. Another uniform. Another voice telling him he was being difficult for existing where he'd earned the right to be. He blinked once, grounding himself in the present. Slowly, deliberately, he unbuckled his seatbelt not to stand but to remove the excuse she'd been reaching for. "I'm not resisting," he said quietly. "And I'm not leaving." The attendant's face flushed. She leaned closer, lowering her voice to something sharper, more personal. "People like you always think rules don't apply to them," she said. The cabin heard it. The younger attendant stiffened. The woman with the phone didn't bother hiding it anymore. The man in row 4 stood halfway, then stopped, unsure if he should intervene. Marcus felt the weight of the words settle not just on him, but on the room. He looked up at her, eyes steady. "You've crossed a line," he said. She laughed, once short and humorless. "You don't get to decide that." Marcus didn't respond right away. He reached into his jacket instead and took out his phone. The movement was calm, unhurried, the kind of calm that didn't signal surrender. It signaled preparation. He unlocked the screen, scrolled once, and placed the phone to his ear. "Yes," he said softly when the call connected. "It's happening now." The senior attendant froze. Around them, the cabin leaned in not out of curiosity anymore, but anticipation. Because whatever this was, it had just stopped being routine, and everyone could feel it. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't stand. Didn't point back. Didn't explain himself to the room. He simply turned his head slightly, angling his body away from the attendant as if she were no longer the primary variable in the equation. "Yes," he said into the phone again, voice low controlled. "Gate B14. First class." A pause. "No," he added. "Not yet." That single phrase unsettled her more than any threat could have. The senior attendant's confidence wavered just a fraction, enough to notice if you were watching closely. Her eyes flicked to the purser, then to the phone, then back to Marcus. "What are you doing?" she demanded. Marcus didn't answer her.
He listened.
The cabin filled the silence for him, the subtle rustle of clothes, the faint buzz of a phone vibrating somewhere behind him, the engines idling patient, unaware that they were about to become part of something much larger than a delay. "Yes," Marcus said again. "Log everything." The purser stiffened at that. "Sir," he interjected carefully, "if you're contacting external parties, I need to inform you that this call is internal," Marcus replied without looking at him. That landed differently. The purser hesitated.
His mouth opened, then closed.
He glanced again toward the cockpit door as if expecting it to offer guidance. It didn't. The younger attendant took a step closer now, drawn by instinct more than instruction. She looked at Marcus, not with suspicion, but with something closer to understanding. The senior attendant scoffed, trying to regain momentum. "You think calling someone changes the rules?" she said. "We follow protocol." Marcus nodded once. "So do I." He turned slightly, lowering his voice further. "Proceed with phase 1, he said into the phone. The words themselves were simple, unremarkable, but the tone, the certainty cut through the cabin like a quiet blade. The senior attendant laughed again, sharper this time. "This is ridiculous." But she was no longer speaking to him. She was speaking to the room. Marcus ended the call and set the phone face down on the tray table, deliberate and visible. "A choice. A signal." He looked up at the purser then. "Not challenging. Assessing. You mentioned security," Marcus said. "If you feel that's necessary, I won't stop you." The purser's jaw tightened. "That won't be necessary yet," he replied, though the word yet betrayed him. The senior attendant stared at Marcus now, searching for cracks for anger, fear, something she could anchor her authority to. She found none. Instead, she found stillness. And stillness made people nervous. Around them, the cabin had shifted again. The murmurs were gone, replaced by focus. Phones were no longer hidden. Faces were open, alert. This was no longer about a seat. It was about how far this would go. The purser spoke quietly to the senior attendant, pulling her half a step aside. Marcus didn't strain to hear. He didn't need to. He knew the pattern. Confusion first, resistance second, then fear. Because systems were powerful, but only as long as everyone agreed to pretend they were infallible. Marcus rested his hands on his knees, grounding himself. He wasn't waiting for permission. He was waiting for alignment. Somewhere beyond the cabin walls, processes were moving. Logs updating. Calls connecting. Names appearing on screens where they hadn't been moments before. The senior attendant returned to face him, posture rigid, composure forced. "This isn't over," she said. Marcus met her gaze evenly. "No," he replied. "It's just started." And for the first time since this began, the certainty in her voice didn't return. Because the calm in his hadn't broken once, the cabin was no longer merely waiting. It was listening. Marcus sat motionless, eyes forward, as if the space around him had slowed to match his breathing. The senior attendant stood a few steps away now, arms folded, posture rigid, less confrontational than before, but far more alert. The purser cleared his throat again. Too many times. A man buying seconds he no longer controlled. "Sir," he said, voice measured but strained, "we're receiving inquiries from ground operations." Marcus looked up at him calmly. "Good," he replied. "That means the right people are listening." The senior attendant scoffed, though the sound lacked conviction. "You keep saying that like it matters." Marcus turned his head toward her for the first time since the call. Not sharply, not aggressively, just enough. "It does," he said. "Just not in the way you think." The younger attendant stood near the galley, now hands clasped in front of her eyes, fixed on the floor. She looked like someone standing at the edge of a truth she couldn't unsee. A soft chime sounded near the cockpit door. The purser glanced toward it instinctively. His expression shifted, subtle but unmistakable. He stepped aside, murmuring something into his headset. Marcus watched him go. Then slowly he unbuckled his seatbelt and stood. Not to leave, to speak. The cabin straightened with him. Spines lifted. Phones rose. Even the engines seemed quieter, like they were holding their breath. "I want to be very clear," Marcus said, voice steady, carrying without effort. "I didn't board this aircraft looking for a problem." The senior attendant opened her mouth. Marcus raised a single finger, not toward her face, but in the air. A pause. A boundary. "I boarded like any other passenger," he continued. "With a valid ticket, a confirmed seat, and the expectation of being treated accordingly." He turned slightly, letting his gaze sweep the cabin, not commanding. Inclusive. What happened next wasn't a misunderstanding, he said. It was a decision. The senior attendant's face tightened. "You're making accusations." Marcus looked back at her. "No," he said. "I'm correcting the record. A beat." Then he delivered it. "You just attempted to remove a man who owns a significant share of this airline." The words landed heavy. Final. For a moment, no one reacted. Then the cabin exhaled sharp collective. The purser stopped mid-step. The younger attendant's head snapped up. A man near the window whispered, "Wait," what the senior attendant laughed, once hollow. "That's not funny." Marcus didn't smile. "It wasn't meant to be." The purser turned slowly, eyes searching Marcus's face now, not for defiance, but confirmation.
Something clicked.
Recognition, maybe. Or fear. Marcus Carter Marcus added, voice even. CEO. Board member. Silence collapsed over the cabin like a dropped curtain. The senior attendant's color drained. Behind her, the cockpit door opened, and the balance of power quietly, irreversibly shifted. The silence didn't break. It fractured. The cockpit door remained open now, just wide enough for authority to spill into the aisle. The captain stood there, one hand braced against the frame, eyes scanning the cabin, not looking for trouble, but for context. The purser approached him quickly, voice low, urgent. Words exchanged in fragments. Names. Titles. Numbers. Marcus stayed where he was. He didn't need to move. The senior attendant stood frozen near the bulkhead, arms no longer crossed, hands now clasped together as if holding herself in place. Her confidence had drained so completely it felt like the cabin had absorbed it. A soft crackle came over the intercom, then stopped. Adjusted. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain's voice came through steady but tight. We're experiencing an internal operational issue. Please remain seated. Murmurs rippled through the cabin, this time unrestrained. Phones rose openly now. No one was pretending anymore. The captain stepped fully into the aisle and met Marcus's gaze from a distance. Not confrontational. Professional. Marcus nodded once. That was enough. The captain turned back toward the cockpit without another word. Seconds later, the engines changed tone.
Subtle but unmistakable.
A low whine easing down. The movement was felt before it was understood. The senior attendant looked around, panic flickering across her face. What's happening? She asked, no one in particular. The purser didn't answer her. Another announcement followed this one, impossible to misunderstand. For operational reasons, this aircraft will be returning to the gate. Please remain seated and follow crew instructions. The cabin erupted not in chaos, but in disbelief. What, are you serious? Did they just say we're turning back? The younger attendant covered her mouth with one hand, eyes wide. The woman with the phone whispered, "Oh my God, already recording." Marcus remained standing, hands relaxed at his sides. The senior attendant finally looked at him again, but this time there was no accusation in her eyes. Only realization. The engines powered down further. The plane began its slow, deliberate turn. Physical reversal. The purser approached Marcus cautiously, now voice lowered to something resembling respect. "Sir," he said, "we'll need to complete some procedures once we're back at the gate." Marcus nodded. Of course. He didn't add anything else. He didn't need to. Around them, the cabin had chosen its side. Some passengers stared at Marcus openly now, not with judgment but awe. Others shook their heads, muttering about delays and meetings they'd miss. But even those voices lacked anger, because everyone understood one thing. This hadn't happened to them. It had happened because of something that should never have happened in the first place. The senior attendant took a step back, then another, as if distance might undo the last 10 minutes. It wouldn't. The plane came to a stop, and for the first time since boarding, the power in the room was no longer assumed. It was defined. The aircraft door opened not to fresh air, but to consequence. Ground staff waited just beyond the threshold, expressions tight, posture formal. Tablets in hand. Earpieces in place. This wasn't routine. Everyone could feel it. The captain stepped aside as two corporate representatives boarded. No uniforms. No smiles. Their presence alone rewrote the atmosphere. The senior attendant straightened instinctively, trying to recover a version of authority that no longer existed. She took half a step forward. One of the representatives raised a hand, not rudely, not aggressively. "Not yet," he said. That single phrase stopped her cold. Marcus remained near his seat, calm as ever, as if this were simply the next item on an agenda he'd already reviewed. The purser stood a few feet away now, eyes lowered, saying nothing. The representative approached Marcus first. "Mr. Carter," he said, voice respectful, measured. "Thank you for your patience." Patience. The word landed softly, but its weight was undeniable. Marcus inclined his head. "I trust everything's been documented. Yes, sir, the representative replied. Audio. Boarding logs. Crew actions. Passenger statements. Behind them, the cabin was silent. Every passenger leaned forward, listening without pretending not to. The senior attendant's breath caught. I was following protocol, she said quickly. Too quickly. The second representative turned to her eyes steady. We'll review that. Not, we believe you. Not explain yourself. Just, we'll review that. The purser finally spoke, voice low. I should have intervened sooner. No one responded, because accountability doesn't always arrive with absolution. The younger attendant stepped forward, then hands trembling but voice clear. I scanned his pass, she said. It was valid. The representative nodded. Thank you. 2 words. Calm. Recorded? The senior attendant looked around the cabin, now at the phones, still raised at the faces that had witnessed everything.
Her shoulders slumped as the reality set in.
This wasn't a misunderstanding she could walk away from. This was a record. The captain cleared his throat. What happens now? The representative didn't hesitate. This flight is delayed pending crew reassignment.
A murmur spread. Some groans. Some nods.
But no protests. The senior attendant's eyes widened. Reassignment, yes, the representative said. Effective immediately. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. This is final, the representative finished. Marcus watched quietly as the old hierarchy dissolved in real time. Not dramatically, not cruelly, efficiently. The purser stepped aside as the senior attendant was escorted toward the front, no hands on her, no spectacle. Just removal. The younger attendant remained eyes glossy, breathing shallow. The representative turned to her. You did the right thing, he said. She nodded, swallowing hard. Marcus gathered his jacket and slid back into his seat, composed. The cabin exhaled, not in triumph but relief, because what they had just witnessed wasn't revenge. It was correction. And for once, the system hadn't protected the wrong person. The cabin settled into a quieter kind of stillness. Not the tense silence from before, but something heavier. Reflective. Marcus sat back in seat 2A as the aisle-cleared jacket folded neatly over his arm. The aircraft no longer felt like a battleground. It felt like a room that had been forced to look at itself. Passengers spoke in hushed tones now. That never should have happened. I can't believe they tried that. He never even raised his voice. The younger attendant moved down the aisle slowly, eyes still red but posture steadier. When she reached Marcus, she stopped. I'm sorry, she said. Not as policy. As a person. Marcus met her gaze and nodded once. Thank you for telling the truth. That mattered more than the apology. At the front of the cabin, the purser stood alone, staring at the floor. He looked smaller somehow. Not humiliated, but confronted by the cost of waiting too long. The captain made one final announcement, voice measured. We appreciate your patience. We'll resume boarding shortly. No explanation followed. None was needed. Marcus looked around the cabin one last time. At the strangers who had watched him be challenged. At the ones who had spoken. At the ones who hadn't. This, he said quietly, more to the moment than the room is why standards matter. No one responded, but several people nodded. He hadn't demanded respect, hadn't shouted authority, hadn't threatened power. He had simply refused to surrender dignity, and in doing so, he hadn't changed the rules. He had reminded everyone why they existed in the first place. Boarding resumed with a different rhythm. Slower, quieter, intentional. New crew members entered the cabin with measured professionalism, eyes forward, voices low. No one rushed. No one performed. The energy had changed, and everyone knew it. Marcus watched from his seat as the last passengers returned, conversations muted now, not because they were afraid to speak, but because something serious had already been said. A man across the aisle caught Marcus's eye and gave a small nod. Not admiration. Acknowledgement. Another passenger leaned over and whispered, "Thank you for standing your ground." Marcus didn't respond with words. He simply inclined his head once. That was enough. The younger attendant, now steadier, more composed, moved through the cabin performing checks. When she reached Marcus again, her hands no longer shook. "You'll be rebooked on priority if you prefer," she offered carefully. Marcus smiled faintly. "I'm exactly where I need to be." She smiled back. Brief. Genuine. At the front, the purser addressed the cabin one final time. His voice was firm, but something in it had softened, stripped of entitlement, replaced by awareness. "Thank you for your patience," he said. "We'll be departing shortly." As the engines powered back up, the sound felt different now. Not louder, just clearer. The plane began to taxi. Marcus looked out the window as the terminal slid past lights blurring into lines of white and gold. He didn't feel victorious,
He felt settled.
because this moment hadn't been about him alone. It had been about what happened when someone refused to disappear quietly and what followed when the system was forced to respond. The aircraft turned toward the runway.
And this time it moved forward.
The plane lifted smoothly off the runway city lights, dropping away beneath the wings. Inside the cabin, seatbelts clicked, screens dimmed, and life returned to motion, but not to normal. Normal had shifted. Marcus sat back as the aircraft climbed, hands resting calmly in his lap. He didn't close his eyes. He didn't check his phone. He simply watched the horizon bend the way it always did when perspective changed. Across the cabin, people settled in with a different kind of awareness. A woman wiped her screen clean and put her phone away, as if the moment deserved memory, not storage. A man exhaled slowly, shaking his head to himself, not in anger, but in disbelief that it had taken so much just to be fair. No one spoke loudly now. They didn't need to. The younger attendant passed through once more, quiet, professional. As she reached Marcus, she paused, not for service, not for protocol. "Thank you," she said softly. Marcus looked up. "For what? For not becoming what they expected," she replied. He considered that for a moment, then nodded. That's how standards change. She walked on shoulders straighter than before. Marcus turned his gaze back toward the window. He thought about how easily moments like this were dismissed once they ended, how quickly stories softened into rumors, then faded. But he also knew something else. Every system remembers being challenged. Not the shouting, not the spectacle. The stillness, the refusal to move when moving would have been easier. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't demanded recognition, hadn't revealed power until power made itself necessary. Because real authority didn't announce itself at the first sign of resistance. It waited. As the seatbelt sign chimed off, the cabin exhaled together, lighter, now steadier. The flight continued, destination unchanged, but trajectory altered all the same. Marcus allowed himself one final thought before closing his eyes. Justice didn't need noise. Dignity didn't need permission. And the standard had been raised quietly, irreversibly at 30 feet.